The Unitarian Church in Quincy, Illinois is proud to present the following readings, talks, and songs presented by Steve REES and Jim Burns. This was originally recorded Sunday, February 14th at 10:30 a.m. and was live via Zoom.
Now we'll have the song Fill Us Up With Your Mercy.
Belly full but they're starving, have a lot but still wanting. Job without you we're empty, fill us up with your mercy. Belly full but they're starving, have a lot but still wanting. Job without you we're empty, fill us up with your mercy. Man does not live by bread alone, but by the word that proceeds from Jah. Man does not live by bread alone, but by the word that proceeded from Jah. Belly full but they're empty, have a lot but still wanting. Jah, without you we're empty, fill us up with your mercy. Belly full but they're starving, have a lot but still wanting. Jah, without you we're empty, fill us up with your mercy.
And now Jim Burns will start off and read a story entitled The Heretic by Peter Rollins. Jim modified the story to share with us today. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Lisa. Just a little bit on this story called The Heretic. Peter Rollins is a writer who resides in Northern Ireland. And if you have any idea of the history of Ireland, it's been a history of conflict between Protestants and Catholics, both who think that they have the right understanding of God. And this heretic story he wrote, I will share it with you. In the 12th century, during the Inquisition, a young man was sentenced to death for heresy because he was accused of distorting the image of God by his false teachings. It was the custom at the time of the Inquisition for the accused to be imprisoned and tortured in an attempt to extract a confession and repentance. Now, this was a time when the whole of Europe, under the control of the empire, believed that they knew the truth in these matters, and to not believe was an offense against the state, the church, and God. There simply was no room for disbelief. Well, this young man was determined to tell it the way he saw it. He freely gave them a confession. After all, what he said was contrary to the accepted understanding of the nature of God. Of that he was guilty, but he refused to offer repentance in relationship to the charges. He was not repentant. Torture was applied, but the man was determined and did not break. Eventually, they gave up trying to change him and turned him over to the court. We'll let the judge give sentence based on the confession alone. After all, in this situation, if the judge decreed the death sentence, an apology would be extracted from the flames, and he had a chance to save his soul by being sorry at the very last minute of his life. The young man was brought before the judge in order to hear the sentence. The judge did due diligence in hearing the witnesses testify to the words and the images that the accused had used to explain the nature of God. As was to be expected, the judge claimed that these teachings were misleading and could potentially lead to conflict and disagreement within the one true church. In light of this terrible situation, the judge decreed that because this heretic was so reticent and stubborn, he must suffer death by fire in order that he repent. Before passing to the other side, and so escaping the flames of hell. In other words, burn, confess, so you don't have to burn for all eternity. Not only would this benevolent sentence bring salvation to the condemned, but also it would silence once and for all the outrageous false doctrines that he was teaching. After the sentence was passed, the judge asked the heretic if he had any final words to say. One thing, Your Honor, he replied, I do not dispute your sentence. Indeed, I cannot, as the charges against me are quite true. But neither will I plea for my life. But if it would please the court, on the day of my execution, I would like to choose from among the gathered crowd the one who would light the fires upon which I am to die. The judge thought for a moment and then agreed with the man's last request. It would be fitting, he says, that one of the common people put him to death, for it was the common people whom this man was leading astray. A few days later, the time came for the execution to take place. As always, the stake and the bundles of sticks were prepared in the marketplace so that the people could gather and watch the sentence be carried out. Since it was a bright morning, the case was well known and a large crowd gathered to watch the morning entertainment. Once everything was made ready, the heretic was led through the crowd and tied to the stake, and the bundles of sticks were heaped around him. Once the people were settled in, the sentence was read aloud to the condemned man. But before the executioner could set the sticks alight, the judge, true to his word, demanded silence. He then stood before the crowd and faced the condemned man. He said, on the day of your sentence, you asked if it would be possible for you to choose the one who would bring your salvation through the flames. I have not forgotten this, and so it is now time for you to choose one who would do this honor. The one you point to will carry out the act by my word and my authority. The young man's eyes darted around the gathered crowd. People became quite uncomfortable. A dark, foreboding fear descended upon the people for the judge would surely demand that the chosen one would light the sticks, and well, that was something that no one wanted on their conscience. Slowly, the entire crowd went very quiet. No one stirred. When the whole marketplace had become silent, the condemned man gazed out into the crowd, and he said, I stand before you now, helpless as a child, condemned to death for heresy. I am guilty as charged, for I have distorted, muddled, and inaccurate view of the divine. But I have only one request, that I be set alight by one among you who is innocent of this charge. That is the end of the story. Amen.
Thank you, Jim. And now Steve Reese will tell us about the Labyrinth. He happens to be here.
Hello, everybody. Jim Burns and I are going to talk in just a minute about our experiences while walking the labyrinth. And these experiences, they're profound, but they're actually very different experiences for us individually. And I'll give you a little bit of background on labyrinths and my labyrinth in particular. That labyrinths, they exist all over the world and in all cultures, and they can be dated back as far as 15,000 BC in the Ukraine. The difference between a maze and a labyrinth, which some people often confuse, is that a labyrinth is a path that has one way of walking and no dead ends. You follow it, as opposed to a maze, which has many options to choose from and often runs into dead ends. And just to give you a little background and reference points to some of the things that we'll mention in our talks, and the picture of the labyrinth is up there. My labyrinth is actually a combination of a medicine wheel and a labyrinth. And the medicine wheel, it's incorporated into the center of the labyrinth. And in the picture, you can see the big stone in the center, and then it radiates out from there. There's 4 quadrants, and I'll be referring to those in my talks, which are just right around the center there. And those 4 quadrants, they represent all kinds of things. The 4 directions, the 4 elements, 4 races of people on the earth, 4 aspects of life, 4 stages of life, and many more, as well as being representations of different animals and different cultures, depending on what culture the medicine wheel is in. And I built my labyrinth starting with that medicine wheel portion in the center several years ago with rocks that I personally collected and hauled to this site in my yard. The main body of the labyrinth, the medicine wheel part, is made of geodes that I collected over the years, which to me is symbolic of the brilliance that is in each of us that's not visible because of our crude and tough outer shell. The center of the labyrinth is a huge geode. Actually, it's over 200 pounds, and that represents the all to me. The labyrinth crosses a small spring-fed creek via a bridge, and you can see that about the 11 o'clock, between the 10 and 11 o'clock position on that picture. And so on the other side of it, it enters into a different meandering pattern than the main body. And actually the word meander comes from the Greek region where actually there is a labyrinth. And so they kind of, that's where meander, the word, comes from. The crossing over the creek and the flowing water, they're both symbolic to me also. So the labyrinth had actually built itself. I just collected the rocks and it told me where to put them. There was no planning as such that went into it. And I'd be happy to talk with anyone who's interested in it outside of this Zoom meeting, if you have any questions or whatever. And I do invite people to come visit it if you'd like. That's kind of why it's there. So now I'd like to turn it over to Jim, and he'll tell you about his experiences and whatnot, and then he'll turn it back to me, and I'm going to read from my journal that I keep of my walks in the labyrinth. So Jim?
Yes, Steve, and everyone. Last August, I went down to Steve's labyrinth. I've been down there a number of times, but particularly last August. I went through the labyrinth that time, and this was a little different. When I'd go down there, I'd find myself many times having an experience that I wouldn't say it was a vision or an emotional event. It was very soft and easy, just moving into me, and I would feel it. And so I started to go down there time after time. In fact, in August, I started that one day, and I just kept going every day. Every day I went down there for 6 weeks. A couple of breaks in there where I had something else that I was scheduled to do, so I did it. But with the COVID and all, it just seemed as though this was meant for me. And I'd find myself driving down to the Quincy Bay and getting out, and getting my little notepad out and start walking and finding things happening. What was going on? What was driving me? I wasn't so sure, but I'll tell you what, something in me was telling me that this is important. Do it. I brought a notebook with me when I first started out, so I was taking notes and kind of scribbled notes as I walked along, and eventually I sat down and kind of put those together, and a pattern started to form. It started with a review of my understanding of the story of Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus Christ has been a model for me in my life through time. But this story about Jesus' life, you won't find in a literal interpretation of the Bible. It is the story of Jesus as my model as I have walked through life. And one thing that he had brought to the earth was basically, with all of the falderall and all of the ideas of all the stuff that he was trying to do, basically it had to do with love. Love one another as you would love yourself. And the part of this that was really tough for his followers and people that were hearing him was, and love your enemies. Love your enemies. What? We're talking about people in a time when conflict resolution meant taking out your sword and cutting somebody's head off. That was the structure of the culture that he was living in at the time. We've come a little bit further on that, but nonetheless, that's what he had to deal with. And actually, his disciples weren't getting it. They were having a struggle. He knew that things were heating up and his time was short and he needed to work something out. He knew that he had to come before this process that he knew was taking place, because he was already considered an insurrectionist, actually, because of the way that he was flaunting the laws of Rome, and that they were looking for him. So he went to Gethsemane, the Garden of Gethsemane, and he sat down and he started to pray. And his prayer was, God, I don't know what's coming. I just don't know. And I'll tell you, I'm making a commitment to this mission that I felt early on in my life, and I'm going to follow it through. I know it's going to be tough. I'm asking you for your support and stick with me. And with that, he got up and he left, and early in the morning, and no sooner did he get out of the garden, and there were some soldiers that were waiting for him. And they said, we're going to arrest you for what you have done. He knew that this was the point. He looked around for his followers. No one was there. So he walked up he went into this, what you would call a crucible of terror alone. He walked through a scourging and torture, even as the heretic did in the story I told. And he found himself on the cross. And he was there, and having gone through all of this, he's hung on the cross. He's gone the distance, and there's nothing there. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? He had not any ability to conceive God as he thought he was, to go through all of this. And there he was on the cross. But he made a commitment. He made a commitment that he would follow through no matter what. And no matter what turned out that he just didn't know. And he had to push on anyway. And he did. He died on the cross. He died on the cross. Now, some would say, boy, that's not being very successful. But he died on the cross following what he thought was good, even and right, even though he didn't know for sure. And he died. And where did he go? If you have faith, or if you believe in what we're talking about as far as sticking with what you think is right, you can believe that he went to God, to Godhead, or whatever you call God, the source, whatever, back to where he was before. he made it through. And I'm following this in the path of the labyrinth, you understand. And it came to me that I'm listening and bringing this story together in my mind I didn't realize, but I recognized all at once, hey, he's doing my life, or I'm doing his life. I have also made a commitment through my life that I would push on and do the best that I could. Hit the wall and wondered, where is God? Recognized that truly I didn't know. There's no surety in this life. And I still had to push on. And I am pushing on. Pushing on without really knowing. And that is the process that I found in the labyrinth. That if I kept pushing on without knowing, but doing the very best I could with the ideas that Jesus had brought and others, I would meet my goal and satisfy what I came here for in the first place. And so that is the big revelation that I had in the garden. I mean, in the labyrinth. It was one to say, when all is said and done, you still have to walk on. And I'm gathering this as I'm walking in the labyrinth. Walk on. Walk on with hope in your heart. And you'll never walk alone. And I went on from there, recognizing that there is no surety. I don't know very much. I suppose the only thing I know is that I don't know anything absolutely sure. But I've found in the labyrinth that as far as I'm concerned, the idea for me is to continue on in spite of all the stuff that I run into, obstacles to what I'm trying to accomplish, and just keep pushing on. And that is one experience that I had in the labyrinth. Now, before I finish, I do want to say that if you saw that, you saw the labyrinth that Steve had. He mentioned the little creek. Another day, I was taking the walk through the labyrinth. I got to the point of being at the little creek, and there's a point in there where you walk across the creek on a little board. I got halfway across that creek. I turned and I looked into the water. And this is what I saw. I call it the underground stream. As I gazed from the bridge into the flowing stream, I see many who have traveled before me. They had entered the water and released themselves into the flow. Where had they gone? What have they encountered? How did they survive? I stood there. Only one way to know. In my mind, I jump in. I jump from the bridge. I hit the water. I sink into the void. Down, down to the underground stream. The flow is guiding me. I no longer have any breath, but I need no breath. Down, down, trusting the flow, dark, but no need for light. The flow moves me around obstacles, accelerates me across vast spaces, slips me through narrow crevices. It is all exhilarating, but frightening. My vision is clearing. I am beholding more and more than I ever knew. I recognize things that I thought I knew, and I'm seeing them with eyes within, showing what is possible, but what was covered by a veil all this time. I see them in the distance, those who were there before. I flow closer to them. Soon I am with them, within them, ourselves, more than ourselves, present to one another, in unity of being. I feel the quality of their being, their awareness. Their being is my being. I am the fullness of being all one. And that is one of the experiences I had in the labyrinth. And Steve can talk more about things that happen there and how you go about walking the labyrinth. There's more to be known. But inside, going into the labyrinth, that's where you find what is really to be known. With that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I just couldn't help when I was listening to you talk. And I know after what I have to say, it all sounds pretty crazy. And it is, but it is a very profound and just enlightening experience when you get in there. The following readings that I'm going to do, they're directly from my journal that I keep of my labyrinth walks. And I also wanted to add that I can bring questions into the labyrinth, but in actuality, the labyrinth is the question. And it's the real question. And it's taught me that when I don't get an answer to my question, it's probably because I'm asking the wrong question. So I'll just read out of here. So forgive me if I'm looking down here, but I wanted to get it like word for word as I put it in there. And I spoke of the quadrants earlier, and I'll mention these in here so you know what I'm referring to. So these are back from in September. In the East, I was told to move on to the physical and mental quadrants and take care of business there for now. In the South quadrant, I was told to take care of myself physically, to fast and not do things in excess. In the West quadrant, I was told that the reason that I do things in excess is that I'm looking for happiness in physical pleasure, trying to make happiness last, and or creating a storehouse for it so I won't run out of it. But I need to discover happiness outside of the physical and the mental. And in the North, I was told that it's from soul consciousness that I can view and evaluate and change the need to seek happiness in the physical, and that is not happiness, that's not lasting, it's not satisfying. To use the physical and the mental consciousness to complement the soul consciousness, and to worry about the spirit and spiritual consciousness after that. So the excess and seeking happiness in physical things and actions actually just causes more problems and unhappiness, which leads to further seeking of happiness and to alleviate the suffering from that unhappiness. And the next day I walked, and at the spirit quadrant, I was told to move to those other quadrants. But as I was about to turn from facing east, with my eyes closed, a ball of golden light shone on my face. It was like a spotlight, really concentrated on my third eye, and it felt so good. And I stood there soaking it in. It was a ball just on my face. And I turned and walked into the South quadrant, where I was told to take care of myself physically, and that my body was a car, it was my house, and it took maintenance or it would fall into disrepair. And then I was told to move on to the west quadrant. And I went to the west, where it was pointed out that I should stop collecting things, to stop the search for happiness in things, and that I needed to discover happiness inside, in the soul. And then I could carry it with me wherever I go. I went to the center, and then everything looked so different. It was shinier and crisper, and I could see the whole labyrinth, though I was just looking at that center stone. Connectedness, integration, a spider web came to mind, and I circled the center stone 3 times clockwise and then 3 times counterclockwise, and I exited the center. And as I walked back, I started thanking everything I passed. And that turned into expressing gratitude one by one for everything around me, and then everything that's touched me. And I was about to exit the spirit quadrant, which is the east, when I stopped to see if the light would once again touch my face. And I face east, I closed my eyes, and it fell on my face like a golden bright ball once again. I was about to exit the spirit quadrant, but as I stood there in awe, suddenly something caressed my head and my third eye. And it was so gentle, so soft. And then it caressed it again in the other direction, sweeping over my third eye and my forehead so gently and lovingly, it just felt like love. And I realized that it was the end of a tree branch, and the leaves were just gently caressing my head and my third eye. It just felt so good. Excuse me. I gave thanks, and I continued to finish the walk, stopping once outside for several minutes just to take it all in and give thanks. So 2 days later, I was jazzed to walk the labyrinth this morning without expectation of anything happening. And I walked with my arms crossed over my chest, repeating the words, I dwell in the heart, I'm free from suffering, I'm healed, I'm at peace. And I felt otherworldly, just very peaceful and calm, and very aware of the sounds in the air, the water, the birds, the geese, fish jumping, chimes, the wind in the trees. And as I got to the bridge, I stopped in the middle and I faced north, noting and being very aware of the flow of the water and how it's been flowing for centuries and more, just flowing, innocent, no agenda. I crossed the bridge and I started clockwise around the rocks at the third section, and I somehow turned to a rock pillar there, and I saw a big green praying mantis on top of the rock looking at me. My heart was filled with thanks, and I knew it was a message of some sort. And I looked it up later, and I found that the mantis is symbolic of stillness, turning inward, and meditation. The rest of the walk was just like being in another dimension while being in this dimension, just so surreal and very comfortable. And it seems I could see the life energy of all, the soul of all, especially the trees. And I had the realization later, just before writing this, that we possibly connect to things by entrainment, that we meet in the middle of our vibrational frequencies, however far apart that they are. And after the walk, I felt the awareness of seeing and feeling the vibratory soul of things, like the bikers that go on by, walkers, cars, drivers, just feeling very comfortable and good, just being, like the symbology of the mantis, still, inward. And when the intent of each is to connect, then we communicate in a common way outside of our individual regular selves, as if we're on another channel. And I felt this applies to all things, whether it's plant, animal, minerals, water, the source, etc. And the next day I began walking. I was quite unsettled. I had 2 cups of coffee beforehand. And I started walking, repeating to myself, I dwell in the heart, I'm free from suffering, I am healed, I am at peace. And I stood on the bridge facing north and marveled at the creek and walked on, nothing major. The east quadrant, I stood and gave thanks and went to the south, the same message as always, take care of myself. In the west, I felt troubled. And after a minute, I was asked, you say you dwell in the heart. What does that mean? And I was sort of blindsided. What did I mean? I'd been saying it to myself without even thinking about it. I went to the North Quadrant, and many different flashes of what soul was or might mean were there, but still I was thinking about the West question. And in the center, I was still repeating that question as I walked the center, and I saw the center stone as the heart, and the rest of the labyrinth just radiating out from it. I then exited the center, walking back, stopping in each quadrant, which I normally didn't do. And in the East Quadrant, I stopped giving thanks to give thanks. And when I felt what I thought was a gnat constantly landing on my forehead, and then it felt like several gnats at once. And then I realized that it was the leaves on a branch pawing at the side of my head like a dog trying to get attention. And I opened my eyes and I reached up and I gently held the leaves like holding a dog's paw. I then looked slowly at the bigger branches and then the whole tree. And the tree wanted my attention and to show me love. And I recognized the tree's soul, spirit. And on the way out of the labyrinth, in the next little circle, I was pawed by another branch, and I stopped and I held it too, thanking the tree for looking out for me, looking out for the labyrinth. I exited and I gave thanks. And yesterday, the message kept hammering at me, if you weren't influenced by fear, what would you do? And it had to do with a specific situation for myself, and I kept asking it, if fear wasn't influencing you, what would you do? And I knew the answer, and I acted on it. It was a big step, and not without guilt. And I had more actually, but this is all going on kind of long, so I'll turn it over to Jim after just saying one thing, and that's in a song that I'm doing coming up here called Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. There's a line in there that says, here I raise my Ebenezer. And Ebenezer, we know it as a name, but it's Hebrew for stone of help. And I was going to do that song anyway, but when I started thinking about that and the labyrinth, it just brought on a whole different meaning to me. So I'm gonna actually turn it over to Lisa here.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Jim and Steve, for sharing your very personal journeys. May our minds and hearts be open and the power of love direct all of us as we sustain ourselves and our own well-being in the discovery of our lives. We ask for a blessing on this message. And now will be the song that Steve mentioned, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing.
Come thy fount, every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy, never ceasing, call forth songs of loudest praise. Teach me some, Lord, your sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above, and praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, the mount of thy redeeming love. Here I raise my Ebenezer. Here by thy great help I've come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a sinner, wandering from the fold of God, here to rescue me from danger, interposed by his precious blood. So come thy fount, every blessing, feed my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise.
We have one final song by Steve, and then we'll have our chalice extinguishing.